Thank you for coming here. It's awesome. It's really cool. This is kind of the start of something hopefully can be a trend. I feel like there's a lot of professors that I could benefit from having some long form discussion with, and I've always kind of wanted to, but time limitations and
Yeah.
stuff don't always allow for that. So hopefully
Mhm.
we can dig a little deep in these topics. So to kind of preface that, I just want to let anybody know for all like 3 people that might watch this. Uh, uh, we might refer to experience design, which I'll get to in a little bit, as XD a lot. And if you were born in the early 2000s, or it's not born, well, raised in the early 2000s, like I was, not that XD. And is there any other sort of lingo that you know off the top of your head that might come up that I might be missing? We should preface.
Uh, oh dear. So blue skying is a big one, right?
Okay.
So this idea, the brainstorming process that the sky is the limit. I think in both of your classes we talked a little bit about the 10 secrets or whatever you call it, which again is just short form for certain things that certain elements that designed experiences have. I think those are probably the big ones though.
Okay, cool. Um, so I don't know if you're aware, you have a description on Screen Rant, which I assume is maybe a little outdated, but I'll read it off and you tell me at the end how much of it's outdated.
Okay.
Austin
A
C.
little.
Baker is a writer and critic from Plymouth, Indiana. Currently residing in Indianapolis, Austin had a fascination with the film and TV industry since he was young. As a teen, he was writing, directing, editing, and starring in movies made in the backyard of his house and little brother, which sounds very familiar to myself. A graduate of the University of Indianapolis's Experience Design and History programs, Austin is currently using his storytelling, writing, and research skills to create online content about the entertainment industry. In his spare time, Austin is currently working on multiple book projects that might be finished now, I'm not sure, as well as several academic articles and public presentations and projects for school. Austin is currently a member of Men's Public Presentations and Projects for School. Austin is currently a member of Men's at Mensa Society for the study of medieval food, which I want to get into later. That sounds awesome. And his local chamber of Phi Alpha Theta, as well as holds membership in the Academy of Leisure Studies. And I added a little bit of my own to this just to contextualize it, stuff that I know now. Austin Baker is, of course, a professor at the University of Indianapolis with skills and expertise in cultural studies, culture tourism, experiential learning, cultural heritage, brand heritage, customer experience, museum exhibition, and analysis and interpretation. Is there anything there that was maybe a little outdated that you want to add on to or a tweak?
Really, the only thing, unfortunately, I'm still working on all those articles and book projects. Have not come out yet. Yeah, really, the only thing that's changed since I wrote that back in like 4 or 5 years ago is that I am obviously, I'm a professor now at UIndy. Back then, I was mainly a freelance writer. I'm still a writer. I still, I have a second gig as a ghostwriter. But really, that's pretty accurate, man. I did a pretty good job on that profile.
You must have, right on. And I've kept in mind that writing aspect too, and I've kind of incorporated that a little bit because, of course, there's a lot of ways that experience design and writing sort of combine in a way. So the way I kind of want to go about this is we'll probably start exploring facets of just sort of experience design as a whole from sort of a broader lens. And then later we'll sort of work into more like an individualized thing. We'll kind of look at your background and how some of those things may apply. So
Sounds
just
good to me.
right off the bat, for people that don't know entirely, how would you describe experience design? What are some XD spaces that people probably partake in at least, minimum once a week, maybe daily, maybe without even knowing what it's called?
Ooh, okay, daily. That's a good challenge. So, what I always like to tell people, which you have heard twice now, is don't overthink it. Right? Experience design is it is designing experiences for a target audience, usually to bring about some sort of transformation. Now, that can be that could be as simple as what we like to call intellectual transformation, like you are educating them about a product or a certain topic. But the main goal of any XD space is you do not want them to walk out feeling the same way or knowing the same things that they walked in. And again, that can be as simple as like a themed restaurant of they walk in hungry, they walk out not hungry, right? It can be a very, very simple transformation, or they walk in a bad mood, and then, something like Dick's Last Resort, right? You make them laugh and they leave happy, right? Transformation can mean many different things, but that is the main goal of any XD space. And there is some debate in the field, personally, about whether you can have experiences that are not designed experiences. I think you can personally, but a designed experience is going to incorporate those 10 secrets we talked about, right? It's going to have some sort of story behind it. It's going to be engaging, usually interactive and multisensory. Usually it's going to evoke some sort of emotion, right? And so spaces that you may encounter that I would claim are like XD spaces, again, it's hard to think of ones that you would encounter every single day, right? So obviously the big examples are like Disney or the Children's Museum in Indianapolis, or we talked about Meow Wolf, which is this really big up and coming XD space out in Santa Fe that is pretty much, it's going to be the next Disney in my opinion. So a lot of these places are actually kind of destination tourism places. But you see elements of XD slipping into, again, maybe not necessarily the everyday sphere, but you see it slipping into, retail stores. You see it slipping into restaurants. You see it slipping into public venues, right? The Indianapolis Zoo is a big one right now that they have started becoming much more experiential with their exhibits. They're hosting events that have different themes and different end goals. So really the closest thing I could think of to like an everyday XD space would probably be like a themed store, or some hospitals even are starting to embrace XD, which I don't know a ton about personally, but I think it's a fascinating topic to go into. Really, what I like to tell everybody, like I said, you've heard this twice now, XD's all over, right? You can find experience design pretty much, in any city, in any region, in any country. You just got to know what you're looking for, pretty much. Hope that was a good answer.
No, it was. That was excellent. Yeah, that was good. And I knew I was throwing you for a little loop there with possibly throwing daily in there. So that was good. That was actually a perfect segue to kind of what I want to explore next a little bit. So, of course, like you said, sometimes sort of categorizing these things, different experiences versus maybe just inactivity can be difficult.
Right.
And of course, it's even disputed amongst some experts amongst, which topics fall where. So from what I've collected, it seems to follow this. Though I thought this was smart, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's completely wrong. Correct me if it's completely wrong. Quote, the whole every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square idea. Okay, so actually in one of the reflections that I submitted from your class, I kind of tried to pick apart, and that was fun. I could have written so many more pages on that. But I could have, I started to pick apart movies in the movie theater. I'm going to expand on that just a little bit more. And how that may be incorporated or categorized as an XD space. So I wrote a little chart here, a little rough chart, where let's say your Disney parks are over here, right? Like undisputed experience design space. And then over here, you have tap water, drinking tap water. Like something's happening, you're drinking water, there was a process to get it there, but to argue that's experience design, good luck. In the middle, I did branch it out a little bit to just theater, because I think this is something we can explore a little bit, and I think would be very interesting too. Not only movie theaters, because right now, of course, that's hurting, and this whole industry is finding creative ways to work around it.
Right.
But theater from a music perspective, you have bands like Iron Maiden that are a lot of the metal is very theatrical. Ozzy, Ramstein, I forget how to say it right, but I like them too. I remember you mentioned it in one class, but they're great. Actually, we even have one of their videos as extra credit. All three of you watching, please watch a Ramstein music video today. So, on that spectrum, I would argue that maybe theater leans a little bit more. Theater is in performance theater versus movies, probably more towards that Disney side. Sorry, mine's not inverted. I gotta figure it out. That Disney side where it's a little closer to experience design. But have there been any performances in particular that you think, oh wow, this is incorporating the audience in kind of an interesting way that leans more this way versus the standard? Where do you kind of fall on that?
Yeah, so I'm glad you bring that up. In the book that I refer to religiously in my XD classes, Pine and Gilmore's Experience Economy, the subtitle for that book is, I think it's called Work is Theater and Every Business a Stage, right? And so, they argue in that book that if you want to design an experience, you have to pull theatrical elements. And yeah, I think you're 100% right? The theater experience itself, I would personally argue, is not necessarily a designed experience. It's watching a show. It's what actually in the Experience Economy book, that would be what they would refer to as a passive experience. Right. So it's something that the audience is just sitting there watching. It's not that much different than, if you were sitting here watching Netflix on your computer or watching a TV show. That said, kind of going back to your original question, yeah, there are some shows out there that I really think are really embracing that experiential element. The big one that comes to mind is Blue Man Group, right? They are very unique, very weird, very evocative, and they get the audience involved. Like I think I saw a video one time of, somebody walked in late to the show and the Blue Men Group up on stage stopped the whole show and like pointed a spotlight on them and were like, hey, where were you? We missed you. But, yeah, that sort of thing starts to get into the XD sphere. There's another one, I cannot remember the name for the life of me, that is going on right now. I think I may have brought this up when we were talking about COVID, how COVID has affected XD. There's this magic show, this magician in New York City who, that's going to bug me forever, what the name is.
You did mention it. I can't remember the name either, though.
Yeah, but basically what he does is he does magic, over Zoom, but he does it so well that it becomes an experience, right? Like people are just baffled how he does his tricks. They are, confused. I think I mentioned in class, celebrities and famous people from all over the world are like coming to this guy's shows because it is a unique experience. I think that is honestly, to me, the kind of defining factor difference, is that with a true experience, this is going to sound stupid, it's something you have to experience for yourself, right? You could go and I could describe the plot of Wicked or Hamilton or 12 Angry Men or something like that, right? I could describe you that plot and you wouldn't be getting the full impact of it, but you would understand the gist of, okay, here are the characters, here are the main story beats, maybe some of the main jokes, stuff like that. If you asked me to describe a Blue Man Group show or a Cirque du Soleil show or that magic show, basically what I would tell you is I can't. You have to go experience it yourself. And I think that is one of the main defining features, one of the main things that separates just a plain old performance from an experience.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think that differentiation is really made when you mentioned like theater stuff. So if you record, they have the recording of Hamilton on Disney Plus.
Right.
Is it the same as being there and seeing it? No, but if they're putting it on Disney Plus, you are kind of getting like 90% of the theater experience.
Right.
You understand the story. You get that versus it being explained, but it's virtually the same story being told. You get all those details. Versus, like you mentioned earlier, the example of Meow Wolf. They show the videos and stuff, but their whole big, I guess you could say, marketing thing that they were using when they were interviewing people was people are going, the recordings don't do it justice. You got to be here. You got to interact with the stuff with your hands. It's a primal thing that messes with your senses. It's got all these themes. You got to be there to do it. So I think that really kind of hammers down that differentiation between just taking in that performance versus being in an XD space and interacting with those objects.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually, in addition to Meow Wolf, I've been doing some research, and there are kind of, I don't want to say copycats, but there are other spaces around the US that are kind of emulating that sort of abstract, absurdist, bizarro world, immersive art installation thing. I think there's Otherworld, Ohio. There's one in Houston that's called Seismosonic, I think is what it's called. But they're literally the same sort of thing. They're these story-driven, immersive art experiences. So yeah, that is a new kind of subfield of XD that is, I think when we talk about it in class, I categorize it as an other. I think we're getting to the point now that it's becoming its own genre. So maybe next time I teach the class, it will be its own sub genre of XD.
Yeah, that would be something. I actually wrote a question in here about that, kind of along those lines. So obviously with those sort of examples, I know Ohio on its own is sort of a disillusioning experience on its own. But in what ways has some of these more recent, I guess you would say, sort of transcendental in nature, sort of trippy, I guess you could say, experiences presented these ideas in a way that I feel like, especially with this category, it would be right for experience design. It's very difficult to translate certain things maybe on a screen or even in a theater performance without that layer of abstraction between the two denotes of ideas. So what are some of the ways, if you know, that they're sort of presenting this in an XD space to maybe mess with your senses or to create this sort of transcendental experience?
Okay. So, and of course, it doesn't help. I've not personally been to any of those. But from what I can tell, like one thing they do is, there's this great, brilliant quote from Thomas Wendt, he wrote a book. He wrote a really in-depth, complicated book about the kind of the philosophy and more of the the philosophical side of XD. And he has this great quote that says, experience design brings the familiar close only to make it strange again. Right. And so with Meow Wolf and Seismosonic and Otherworld, Ohio, that's exactly what they're doing. You go into this space, and I know I've talked to people who have been to Meow Wolf, and they say it starts off normal. Right. It starts off, you're in this house of this family, and there's this story that goes behind it. And then at one point, you open up the fridge and you can walk into the fridge into this literal other world. Right. Which is something you just don't see. It kind of subverts expectations. It plays with what you know. The Omega Mart, which is Meow Wolf's new installation in Vegas, it is designed to look like a grocery store, but I've been watching videos, and there will be a point where apparently randomly throughout the day, the lights will start to flicker, and there's this screen that comes on and plays this message. And every time it does it, every single employee in the store stops what they're doing and turns to the screen and just kind of stares at it until the message is over. So again, it's normal. It's subverting your expectations pretty much of what you think is normal and turning it into something memorable and surreal and in Meow case, I would argue transformative.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like a big allegory for Vegas in of itself. So, what better place to put it?
Exactly. And with the Omega Mart, it's also all about, it talks about like consumerism and environmentalism. Like they have, if you ever have time, they actually have a whole little YouTube series where they're advertising their products. And yeah, it is social commentary all over. Like there's one cereal that they sell that literally it talks in the ad and has on the box like, oh yeah, it contains, the just minimal amount of plastic allowed by the FDA. So it's like, yeah, it's like making social commentary via XD, and that's why I absolutely love these guys.
Yeah, for sure. This kind of plays into that a little bit, but this one's a little loaded. It's a little loaded.
Okay.
With info, but hopefully we can take that, and if I need to reiterate on anything, I can, and we can really take this, and it kind of goes along those lines. So, with big companies like Microsoft and Google pushing augmented reality, I kind of have a little fascination with this, so I got to work it in there somewhere. And companies like Tesla, you got pushing technological information. We're looking at stuff like Neuralink, self-driving cars. Hopefully, sometime in the near future would be awesome. Commercialized space travel would be nuts. And about a month ago, I just found out about this literally yesterday. IBM developed a new microchip, roughly the size of a fingernail. It contains 50 billion transistors, and it's the size of 2 DNA strands. Wow. So, with this moving forward, I'd argue humanity has entered this sort of technological idealization stage akin to the World's Fair of 1889, where there's this big celebration of human ingenuity and technology, and it's happening very, very rapidly right now. Of course, the world is also experiencing some other events that are a little similar. 1893, there was an economic depression. We just had the recession because of COVID. There was a rise in nationalism. Today, there's more independent countries than literally ever before. Unfortunately, these qualities led to World War I, so hopefully we can keep the advancement without turning Earth into a flying asteroid. But with this sort of technocratic optimist mentality in mind, Walt Disney was, of course, very much ahead of his time, and he originally planned the Epcot Park to be a retro-futurism utopian city, like of course, that you taught us. Is the experience design field very privy to this sort of technologically optimistic attitude in the Western world especially? And if that's the case, what might be the development that suggests to support the growth in this optimism, or basically to not overcomplicate that question, in what ways is that mentality sort of reflected in some experiences that may be popping up now to sort of support that idea?
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll do my best to answer that one. So I think a big thing that you are seeing now, particularly with the rise of globalism and this technological advancement. I think I mentioned this in class, but XD for the longest time was it was a Westerner sport, right? It was a thing that people in the United States and the UK kind of knew about, did, and that was kind of it. Now, because of again the growing communication channels and the rise of the global economy and all that stuff, you are seeing that the field is becoming more connected, right? You have people who would identify as experienced designers in China and Japan and South America nowadays, and so I think as a whole the field is kind of coming together. And as far as as far as you're talking about with the attitudes towards technology, I think they kind of have to go hand in hand, right? You see so often the next big thing is going to be what we call extended realities. That's what they call it in that's another piece of lingo that I forgot to mention. But basically, it's this combination of virtual reality and augmented reality, and there's one other that I completely forget. But basically, it's this idea that, and it's kind of creepy when I actually stop and think about it, that like you'll never be able to exit an experience if you don't want to, right? So, maybe you go to a Disney park and you are there, you're having a great time, but then you have an app on your phone, right? And so maybe the ways that you interact with certain characters or certain objects at the park influences what happens on that app when you go home. So it's almost like a inescapable experience almost, is kind of what I would argue. And with these new innovations such as the Aeon XP system, which I think we talked about that in class a little bit. It's this software that is being sold to experiential institutions that basically lets guests play out a story or different experiences across many different channels. So, just because you leave the theme park, your experience with that company can continue when you go to one of their brand stores, or if you go to a concert that's sponsored by them. And I'm thinking about the theme park industry, but the museum industry can do it too, right? You go to the Children's Museum and then, they host a river walk or a canal walk in downtown Indy a month later. And, maybe you get extra bonus points, or you unlock a different part of the experience by going to that and using the app that is integrated with the software. So I think that's where it's headed, this extended reality, this experience that you're never going to be able to escape if you choose to, right? As of now, it is optional. Who knows? Maybe the Mickey overlords will take over someday, but as of now, it's still optional.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull a Joe Rogan here and do one of those like, whoa. Yeah, I know in class we discussed the idea of sort of bringing the brand home and using, we have stuff like Alexa and stuff now, and of course, when augmented reality is a little bit more integrated, maybe integrating that in the home, but I never really even considered the thought of a lifestyle brand that takes you everywhere and promotes just basically a lifetime payment plan. Then at that point, it's just a competition for the youth. And then, wow, this is like a whole novel waiting to be written. That's kind of crazy. And that's not totally unimaginable, because we honestly, that's kind of what happens now with most of our institutions. It's just kind of get them young and make sure they get on that lifetime plan. That's why cinematic universes are so popular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's the other thing that I think systems like Aeon XP are going to revolutionize. It's going to. I'm a sucker for world building, right? So, that's the XDer and the writer in me. I love doing world building. You can literally do so much world building with this system, right? Because, maybe you meet a character at one experience who is exclusive to that experience. And so another thing about XD in general, a lot of the times it is customizable. Right? It's customizable, and you always want your guest to feel like the protagonist, right? And so with systems like this, with extended reality, no experiences are going to be the same, right? Because, maybe I go to Universal Studios, and then I go to one of their movie premieres, and then go to one of their stores. Okay, well, maybe you went to Universal Studios, and then, a museum exhibit they were sponsoring on the history of cinema, and maybe, a concert or something, right? And so because of that, even though we're both using the same app and interacting with the same story, we're going to have not completely, but we will have semi-different experiences. And thus, that is going to be incentive for either of us, in this example, to go check out the other ones, because I missed out. There's that kind of fear of missing out in the XD world. It's like, I need to go see this. I need to go to Meow Wolf. I need to go to all the Meow Wolves to complete the story, right? It's gamification at its finest. The future of XD, in my opinion, yeah, it's going to be all about extended realities and gamification.
Okay, my brain is going off like a firecracker right now. So that means, oh boy, this could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I gotta be careful here. So essentially, all you would have to do is introduce the element of affordable and widespread augmented reality, which large companies have been moving towards for at least 15 years now that I know of. And you can essentially sell, right now we're in the age, of course, of data and companies using data being lost to apps, the algorithms, AI learning. So essentially, all you have to do is introduce the element of affordable and widespread augmented reality. And with the advancements in AI learning, advertising, and there's another one that I'm currently missing that, because my brain is so fried, holy cow, that you could essentially sell an augmented utopian fantasy to people on a lifetime payment plan and gamify it. That's kind of cool, but also kind of horrific at the same time.
Yeah, and I think as long as it stays optional, right? You know, that's one thing. As long as it stays optional, I think it's okay. Well, no, and that's I think you may actually have taken the global class before I discovered Westworld, so I don't think we got to talk about it. But now in the global class, when we're talking about the ethics of XD, we talk a lot about like Westworld, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with that show. That is where some scholars actually think the field is going to go as well, right? And you kind of see that, like with the new Star Wars hotel, where literally when you are there in the hotel, it is a full-on immersive experience where, you know, they basically don't break character. You are treated as your character would be treated. So, you know, if you choose to ally yourself with the First Order, like the stormtroopers will treat you better than the Resistance will, and vice versa, right? And then that experience is stored in your Magic Band and it affects your experience throughout the actual Galaxy's Edge theme park, right? And so really we are kind of one step away from the Westworld sort of thing, of these fully immersive experiences that literally pull you out of reality and put you somewhere else. And again, whether that's good or bad, that is a whole discussion in and of itself.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially with this, you know, the platform, and you see a lot on the internet platform, a lot of fear mongering around this stuff. There's a lot of fear mongering around, I think, AI especially, and because people are so disillusioned with learning mechanisms, and they think about the Terminator that they forget the good that some of this stuff can do, like learning algorithms and super intelligence, basically. But I just want to take a second to acknowledge, you know, how amazing that is. Just that experience alone that Disney can provide based on all of these things. But at the same time, yeah, it's certainly something to think about. It's very interesting, and I feel like there's a lot of different paths. But at the end of the day, like anything else, it's a tool, and people are going to use the tool, how they use it, and things are going to be really, really awesome. And it makes me wonder if, on the other side, it begs the question of, at what point do we find the sort of disillusion of choice, where if I don't want to go too deep on a different topic, but I wrote a paper about loot boxes in video games, and how basically the loot box monetization system in video games is tailored in a certain way to appeal to kids. And if you think about your brain like a hill that you're sledding down to kind of find different points of view, it keeps sledding down one thing over and over and over again. It basically trying to kind of wire kids for addiction and to keep buying into those. Right. So at what point might those learning algorithms get too good to the point where they're like, okay, we know exactly the perfect package to give to this guy that he's not going to say no, and he's going to keep paying forever no matter what it takes?
I think we're already halfway there, honestly.
I do too.
Yeah, because you look at I'm currently planning a well, no, not planning. I'm leaving tomorrow, going to Universal, for the first time in forever. And yeah, since my wife and I have been researching, the hotels, the resorts, stuff like that. Of course, we're getting Facebook ads, we're getting, ads on our social media, on, Instagram and TikTok and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, and the scary thing is you look at that and say, oh, okay, I actually would be into that. So like they know the AI, the software they use knows your interests, and it kind of can suggest this ultimate vacation package to you that again, mine is going to look completely different than yours, which could look completely different than somebody else's. I think we're already kind of halfway there, and yeah, it's a very strange thing to think about, especially given where the future of the XD field is going, that like eventually are we going to have companies that are basically suggesting sort of these escapist experiences based on what they know you want to get away from? Like are they going to be like, oh, well, this guy hates his job and, has had a really stressful time with, family medical issues. And so we're going to create this story for him that is all about, overcoming adversity, or, escaping a hospital, or, something like that, right? Some sort of symbolic story that kind of goes with what you are trying to personally escape from. Right. And that's just a crazy thing to think about.
And it's not that far off. It's so weird.
Oh.
I almost refuse to accept it in my brain, but I have to because it's the reality. It's not that far off.
Yeah.
And as much as I'm sure this sentence has been muttered so much now, that's a Black Mirror episode. I mean, that would be a great story.
Yeah.
And again, I think to reiterate just the balance of that being a sort of tool is that we have algorithms now that go, hey, we know exactly what you want. Like, we know exactly what you want, and we can calculate where on the entire internet the best price for that thing is. That's pretty good. I would argue that's a good thing. But at the same time, like you say, there's that, or as you give one example for, there's that other side as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting seeing that moving forward. And earlier you mentioned it's always important to make the guests of a park, let's say, the protagonist of the story, of an experience. And I was wondering, are there, that you're familiar with, it may be more uncommon, or maybe it's more common than I thought, are there examples that you know of where the protagonist or the guest isn't always this sort of hero figure or the hero archetype from an archetypal perspective, but maybe like the trickster archetype, because that would be really fun?
That is a really good question. The closest things I could think of, there is a theme park out in Utah, of all places, that is Evermore. It's called Evermore Park. And what it kind of prides itself on being is it is a theme park in the sense that it is a themed land that you pay admission to, and then they have like drinks and shops and stuff like that, but there are no roller coasters or dark rides in Evermore. Evermore is all about creating an immersive story driven experience in the vein of like Dungeons and Dragons. So you have this fantasy world with characters that are goblins and elves and, rogues and stuff like that you can interact with. But what makes them really unique is they encourage their guests to come in character, right? And so you come with this pre-prepared, like I said, it's like a live action D&D basically. And so, maybe you come to this experience as a dwarf cleric or, something like that. Just because that's usually what I play as in D&D. But, you go with this character in mind, and then that informs your interaction with the employees. And then of course, the core experience of Evermore is much like D&D. They give you sort of these quests to go on. There are like animatronic creatures that you can quote unquote fight. I think there's like a dragon you can slay. But it is very, very story driven at its core, and kind of revolutionary as to what a theme park actually can be and what an experience design space can actually be. And I kind of went off on a tangent there. Can you remind me what the question was originally?
It's amazing. That sounds badass, to be honest. I was the initial question was just whether or not, and you answered it. You did. Just whether or not there's certain experiences that you know of that stray away from the classical hero archetype and maybe add guests into others, like maybe the trickster archetype, because that would be so fun to embody. And yeah, you answered it perfectly. And even more, because that expanse is very interesting.
Yeah, and there was another example of that too that I can think of that we talked about in our global experience design class, of the Nordic LARP. Right. So this form of LARPing that is more intimate, I guess you could say. And some of these scenarios that you get put in when you do a Nordic LARP, again, I've never personally done one, but from what I've been reading, from videos I've watched, from people I've talked to, they're all about destroying that typical archetype. Right. So the one of the key features of a Nordic LARP, as opposed to just, what we do over here in the US, is that it tries to be experimental and kind of turn social norms on its head. So there's one really interesting Nordic LARP that I was reading about in an article that basically all of the players were hobos. Right. So they were homeless people, and basically their task was that they had to, one of their friends had recently passed. And so they had an urn of his ashes, and they had to basically, what they had to do was travel across Europe via train and then dump his ashes in the river, or not the river, in the sea. And so, so you're not the typical hero archetype in that. And it's also this fascinating social experiment too, because, they were playing homeless people, and they were, told not to break character. And so they got to see how the general population reacted to them via their character. And so, those are two really big examples. You see that a lot, in Nordic LARPing. They're trying to turn things on their head and make it more about social commentary and true transformation, and again, subverting expectations, pretty much.
Absolutely, that sounds really interesting, the way that would all work out. And I could definitely see how that would be transformative for sure, like you said, from a perspective like that, even if it's just a light simulation that has safe words or whatever. Of course, with activities like that, it requires a lot of cooperation. And unfortunately, not all human beings on this earth like to cooperate with other human beings. Are there certain safeguards against people, even in something just as open as a theme park, that maybe just have a bad attitude, even if it's like the kid that got drug along that has a really bad attitude, or to try and bring them into the experience, or to shield, I guess, their attitude from others?
So that is actually one issue that still hasn't quite been solved, right? Because much like when you're dealing with experiences in the natural world, and like a zoo or a national park or something where you have unpredictable animals. Well, I mean, theme parks have unpredictable animals too, humans. So that's the thing. It's like, no matter how much research the Imagineers do, or the experience designers do, or the visitor studies, you can figure out patterns, right? You can figure out, oh, this demographic is going to react poorly to this sort of experience, or they will love this experience, or they you should interact with them using this particular set of lingo, word, whatever. But no matter what, I mean, human beings are unpredictable. right? And so you can never 100% keep that from happening. And if you, I'm sure you've probably done this before, but there are, forums, websites that have kind of testimonies from like former Disney cast members that talk about, I mean, some truly like awful things that they have seen happen in the parks, but they don't get talked about, right? Because what Disney has, they have a really good they have really good security. They train their employees to kind of manage those difficult guests and stuff like that. And so if there is an issue, it gets resolved, pretty instantly. And most people don't even see it. And if you do see it, if you did witness it, usually they give you some sort of free stuff or backstage passes or something like that to kind of say, oh, we're sorry, please don't mention this on your TripAdvisor review, right? So yeah, you can never 100% prevent that, but I think there are things you can do to make people forget about it and kind of solve the issue as quickly as possible.
I see. Okay, so speed and what would be the word? Not suppression. That sounds way too sinister. But compensation would be the key. Then it sounds like.
Yeah, kind of quick response time and yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, because suppression doesn't sound
no, it sounds very. It's a very good thing to make people happy when they see some dude yelling at an ice cream cone because it's got half a scoop less or something.
Yeah, exactly. Which again is stuff that has happened before, and it's always going to happen. You're never going to completely skirt around that. That's just human nature. People get angry. Some people are just ridiculously rude. The best thing you can do is kind of fix the issue as it occurs and hope that it wasn't bad enough that it gets out to the public, right?
On those lines a little bit, on the terms of sort of the magic breaking a little bit of some of these parks and places, something that really morbidly interests me is the uncanny side a little bit of the larger part of the industry. So you have like the knockoffs, the proudly unsafe and traumatizing experiences. I can't remember the name of the place. It's on the Never Eat Soggy Waffles west side, like northwest side of the U.S. It's like a Halloween mansion that they basically torture people. Maybe it's not northwest.
Oh yeah, Mckamey Manor.
Yes. That place is very interesting to me because they send Navy SEALs out, like they can't finish it.
Yeah.
Even some of the sort of unsettling mechanisms, I guess you could say, behind like the magic and everything, where you pull it away, just something great when it's shut off can be like, ooh, you just kind of see it there physically versus the idealization that's sort of projected, in any entertainment experience. So, and I also want to throw in some fun buzzwords that I love to explore. And all four of you listeners, if you haven't Googled some of this stuff, Google some of this stuff because it's very interesting. So, like liminal spaces, knockoffs, just abandoned spaces. Oh, I guess only one buzzword. That's a shame. Anyway, anything that has a sort of like initially unsettling factor when you peel back the curtain. And I wanted to ask you, have you ever had any unintentional glimpses back behind the curtain during an experience? Or has that happened to you maybe when you were younger, when maybe the magic broke or something kind of creeped you out a little bit and then it kind of, something clicked and you were like, whoa, like there's people here, this isn't a character, or this is a machine, or this is how the machine works?
So I've got a couple examples here that I can think of off the top of my head. The first one is a story that my parents always loved to tell, and my grandparents, when they were still around, they thought it was the funniest thing ever. Apparently, back when I was a toddler, we went to Disney World, and I really, for whatever reason, wanted to talk to Chip and Dale, and they weren't paying attention to me. So I guess I walked up to one of them and kicked them in the leg. And they kind of broke character a little bit. And so that was kind of my first kind of experience with that. Another one that I think I always bring up in the classes that always makes me feel like a total idiot, but was the Kilimanjaro safaris. So back when I was in high school, we went on a senior trip to Walt Disney World, and we went to Animal Kingdom. And as I was standing in the queue line for Kilimanjaro safaris, I was reading the signs, and they were, watch for poachers, and this nature preserve is established by blah 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 blah. And as I was in line, I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm like, this is pretty cool. Like, they have like an actual nature preserve here in Central Florida, like with African animals. That is really interesting. How did they do that? And so I thought it was actually like a real nature preserve. And we got on the bus and started going on the tour. And then that's when we saw the animatronic elephant, which actually is not there anymore. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. No, this is just an elaborate story-driven ride. But I was fully immersed. I fully believed it until I saw that animatronic and heard the storyline of like, oh, the poachers have kidnapped the baby, or maybe it's a baby zebra. I don't remember, but the poachers kidnap a baby animal, and I was kind of like, oh, wait a minute, okay, no, this isn't real. So that was kind of one example of me being kind of like sucked out of the immersion that I was like completely into up until that point. I'm trying to think if there's any other kind of behind the scenes sort of stuff. So I think I was on the Haunted Mansion when it broke down one time, but again, they do such a good job of even incorporating that into the experience. I think when it shut down, a voice came over the speaker system basically saying, oh, ghosts are playing tricks on our ride vehicles right now, so please remain seated. And so even though the ride had broken down, they kind of still tried to keep you in that immersive mindset. And so, yeah, those are really the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Gotcha. All good stories. And I think it's very telling that the last one, the Disney one that handled it so well, is the last one you remembered, because they handled it so well. It also makes you think too with the safari story that we really don't see what's there. We're always processing these symbols and tools and through this interface, through all of our experiences and what we've learned to be what. And I think it's very telling and very, very unique to the human experience in a way that we can make experiences like this out of. You can think you're in a safari, but there's really, felt and metal and stuff in front of you, but you don't see that. You see the safari getting ready to take off. So actually, also on that note, of course, I'm going to reiterate this one more time because I feel like this was like the big golden rule. Like if you open up the scroll, this was on there. One of the main goals, because this is what makes it or breaks it, of an XD space is to be transformative. So was there ever an XD space that really changed your outlook on either a certain thing or life in general? And what was that message? And if not, what is something that you think handled it very well?
So I'll say, gonna get a little real here. So two XD spaces that I would argue had the biggest impact on me personally, the biggest transformative impact on me, were the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and then the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. So both of those, again, and that makes sense because those ones really are trying to transform you into looking at things in different ways, into seeing things from the viewpoint of the victims of those, horrific experiences. But the two things that really kind of got to me. So I went to the Holocaust Museum when I was in 8th grade. Right. So I was a middle schooler, and a couple different things happened there. So the first one was I decided to go alone. The rest of the group was there, but I wandered off on my own because, I just figured I was not going to get the full impact of the experience if I was with a bunch of other middle school boys, right? Because you know how that generally goes. Don't take things seriously, trying to be tough and cool and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, this is not the time or place. And so, I went off alone, and there were a couple different touch points that I would argue that really, really hit me that I still remember and still just like haunt me to my core. There is the part where you can get into the train cars, right, that would have transported people to the camps. And you can step inside of them, and you get to see, just, how small they were. You get to see how dingy they were. You get to put yourself in the experience of the terrified people who were being transported basically to be killed, right? And so that had a huge impact on me. The second one was and this is one that most people don't even remember, but for whatever reason, it really had a transformative impact on me personally. There is a section of the Holocaust Museum where they have the gate that would have basically kept people, that would have shut behind people when they were in the gas chambers. Right. And to me, like I walked up, and for whatever reason, I don't know, I walked up and I touched it, and it just like hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh my God, this is what people touched, in the last moments of their lives during this horrible event. And then, of course, the third kind of touch point of the Holocaust Museum that most people who I've talked to who have been there remember as well is the hallway of shoes. Right. So you literally walk down this hallway. They have replicas of the furnaces, basically the body furnaces on both sides of you. And then all along the floor are shoes of the victims. Right. And there's this very distinct smell that I still, like, I'm talking about it and I can smell it right now. And that one is a touch point of that experience that I think most people would argue was the most impactful and transformative to them. As far as the Civil Rights Museum goes, it was a similar situation, right? So, you're going through this museum, you are watching videos, you're seeing artifacts, you are seeing outfits, learning about, MLK and Malcolm X and the whole fight for civil rights in the 60s. But the thing with the museum itself is it is basically they refurbished the hotel where MLK was assassinated. And so the last exhibit, well, I guess there is like an aftermath exhibit, but the last main exhibit in that building is you get to walk into Martin Luther King Jr.'s room that is set up exactly the way it was the night he was killed. And of course, so you get to see, the plates he left on the table. You get to see the clothes he had laying out. And then, you can even walk over to the window and look out on the balcony where he was shot. Right. And then, of course, the whole time it's playing this like really somber gospel music. And like, it was just, it was a haunting experience that really, I feel like transformed me personally. Again, those two kind of more real and sombering experiences, but those are the two examples that I could think of instantly when you ask that question. Because they really affected me emotionally. They made me look at things differently. I would argue, made me more empathetic, made me more understanding of the plight of people who were fighting for civil rights and the people who, were living under Nazi regimes. But so kind of a dark turn there this conversation took, but it's one it needed to take, I think.
No, I agree. I obviously certainly see why those would be very transformative experiences. And kind of basically what I think you're hinting at too is, these stories are very important to tell. Very important. Maybe the most important stories to tell. So it's I hope that I'm gonna get on a soapbox a little bit here, but I hope that some of our more popular media, in terms of film, and I think books are still there, but I feel like film has fallen from this not category. What's the word? Film has gotten a little less real, I feel like. I feel like it's gotten a little more idealized, and I think it's important that we tell stories in any medium that reflect like this. Of course, there are the outliers, but overall, I feel like as a society, we've forgotten a little bit, and we've strayed away, and we forget what terrible things that we're all capable of, because it's very easy to forget that the Nazis, at the end of the day, as well, they were just people. They were just people, just like anyone else. So I guess that was the most transformative sort of kind of supports that a little bit.
Yeah, and I fully agree with you. I feel like a lot of popular movies. There are still, I would argue there are still authentic historical movies out there, but you see so many of them that are kind of this sanitized version of what actually happened, right? You see World War II movies that don't really get into the atrocities that were committed by really actually multiple different parties, right? We always talk about Germany, but there were other countries that did some pretty awful stuff too. We never touch upon that. Right. Song of the South, right? That's another big one that's controversial. That kind of whitewashes the antebellum United States South during that time period. Or not antebellum, sorry, the post-war South.
I'm not familiar with that one. Is that a movie?
Oh, okay. So Disney has done its job then. So Song of the South is actually, it is a Disney movie that came out, it came out in like the 30s or 40s. And so the concept seems innocent enough, right? So it is basically, the concept is there is a old African-American man who is telling the stories of former slaves, basically like their mythology, right? So Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox and stuff like that, which is, of course, it's Disney, so it's animated and, really fun and whimsical. The problem, though, is this is a 1930s, 1940s Hollywood film depicting an African-American man and former slave as its kind of main character. And so there are undertones of kind of, racism. There are undertones of, what happened really wasn't that bad. This time period was just, fine for people of color and stuff like that. And to the point where, Disney has tried to bury it. I think the last time it was even available to buy for home video was the 80s, right? So it's not on Disney Plus. They are doing their best to try and basically pretend it never happened, because it is kind of this dark stain on their company's history. Splash Mountain is based on Song of the South, and they recently just announced that they're retheming it to be Princess and the Frog, because again, they want to kind of hide the fact that they released this movie. And of course, there's lots of debate about it, about whether or not it really is that bad, or whether it should be, lost the dustbin of history, whether or not Disney should censor it, or if they should release it just with a disclaimer saying, this is a product of its time. No, definitely look that up if you haven't heard of it. It is a fascinating little case study of how popular opinions and a company's image can change over time.
Wow. And sort of I haven't seen it, so I can't judge to what extent, but knowing that time and knowing Disney, it's probably about where I expect it to be. the irony of covering it up with the first black Disney princess is sort of ironic. Yeah, as well.
Yeah.
And I believe Disney was commissioned some war propaganda around that time as well, right? Animated?
Oh yeah, there is a Donald Duck cartoon where he goes to Nazi Germany. Yeah, where he has a dream that he is living in Nazi Germany. And that is another one that Disney has basically, again, you can't find it on Disney Plus. I think you can find it on YouTube if you look for it.
Really?
But
yeah, very suppressed even on YouTube. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And so they are very the what is it called? Internet Archive is your friend, right? So the Internet Archive actually has the full movie, basically a rip of the VHS version of Song of the South. I think it has a lot of those propaganda cartoons, and that's something you saw that with all the companies, right? You know, Popeye the Sailor was literally, it started off as American Navy propaganda, and there are some really, really racist depictions of the Japanese in those early shorts. Warner Brothers did it, right? You see, oh Lord, there's a
Warner Brothers were bad with it.
Yeah, there's a Bugs Bunny cartoon where, he is, it takes place in the Old South, and it is about what you'd expect from a cartoon from that time period. But the fascinating thing is, with Warner Brothers, they have actually kind of embraced it, right? They have basically released these and basically said that, okay, we understand that, these views were not okay then and they are not okay now, but basically, pretending they didn't exist is almost as bad as, still promoting them today, right? And so it's kind of interesting to see how different companies have gone about their kind of dark past. But that went off on a tangent, but
no, that's good. No, the tangents are great. I just soak them up. I think Warner Brothers, honestly, kind of respect to them, because I think that's the way to do it. I hope, and I really do, hopefully, I believe most of us live in a time now where we look back, we kind of laugh at something like that. How atrocious and awful is that even got made. And, to sort of embrace the positive change that has come since that time period and the sort of exponential growth that we make since then. And I would assume, I don't know if they put like a disclaimer. I know that's usually not the claim, the want, I don't know, the word's escaping me, but to continue, the want from people, if something old like that is outdated, just like, hey, we know this is outdated, be very clear about the thing, and then here is it uncensored. This is history.
Right.
There you go. When, of course, Disney is a little bit more about scrubbing it up because of that lifelong subscription of Disney culture that they need from people in a certain way, and from certain countries and things as well. I know you mentioned China at one point, and anything criticizing China or making fun of China or anything would instantaneously gone. We see that even today. I think that's something we're going to kind of look back in bit horror, at least I hope so, in the future today with, they took, in the Star Wars posters, they took Finn, who was on the front, who's a black man. They put him way in the back, and I think they got rid of him on some posters. They had a lesbian kiss in Rise of Skywalker for the social justice points. But then for the Chinese audiences and other countries that don't share those Western values and such equally, they cut it out. So, sorry, you don't really get the points for that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And I would say, and Russia, I think it was Russia that banned the new Beauty and the Beast because there was the hint that LeFou might be gay, which, again, it really, having seen the movie, it was so subtle, I probably wouldn't have caught it. But, that they had to, they couldn't show that in Russia, because of the social and political climate over there currently. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to think about, how are we going to look back on this time period? What things are we going to look back and kind of view like we currently view those Disney and Warner Brothers cartoons from the 30s and 40s?
Yeah, for sure. And I have kind of two things to branch off of that. The second one's a little unrelated to most of these topics, so I'm going to save it for the end. But the first one is kind of where do you, I think now, especially with such a rise, such a golden age in independent entertainment crafting,
Mhm.
and with so many streaming services and everything popping up, and there's just this mass starvation for content from basically independent developers. I mean, even with these cinematic universes popping up, you're seeing directors getting hired that have done one or two movies or their own project, and they're like, "Hey, we think you're competent for this. Come in," and they, there's a lot of opportunity right now. But with, of course, the controversy with very, very large companies putting out very, very large pieces of media, trying to apply appeal to an audience that is globally connected, we find that the trend seems to be bowing to certain places that don't respect all of the human rights and everything. Of course, China is the biggest, easiest example. If the filming of Mulan, that was a catastrophe, really, where they attributed filming of certain pieces of the film to the Chinese government to thank them in the credits while they were doing it on what's essentially concentration camps, I guess is the word you would use to describe them. Where do you see the future heading in that regard in terms of that sort of clutch that the socioeconomic, buzzword alert, influence has on that side of the media? Do you think that sort of independent creation will be on the rise that could potentially be to the point where we get maybe a branch off new larger studio that repeats the process? Actually, I'm gonna let you go because I don't want to answer the question for you with my own theories.
So yeah, I think you were kind of on the start of, kind of what I was going to say there. Yeah, I think what's going to happen is as things become more, I mean, history repeats itself, right? I think what we're going to see is, yeah, exactly kind of what you were starting to say there. You're going to have these different companies start to break off from the bigger companies, right? So instead of, Disney owning Pixar and Fox and Marvel and all that, they're kind of already starting to do that. How you've got like Marvel Studios and, Pixar is technically its own entity. DreamWorks is its own thing, even though it's technically owned by Universal, right? I think, yeah, you're going to see that. You're going to see a lot more spin-off sort of studios. And one interesting thing, though, again, from more of an experience design perspective, you see, and you're already seeing this rise of the independent creator. A lot of people in the XD field end up going off to create their own companies, right? Because for that exact reason, because they feel kind of constricted by working for a large company that already has, a bureaucratic system in place and their own way of doing things and their own work culture. And frankly, again, my own personal opinion, a lot of bureaucracy stifles creativity, right? It's hard to be creative when you have to run your ideas by, different marketers and PR people and, the head designer and the CEO of the company, right? Because at that point, it's like, okay, it's not really yours anymore. And so that's why I think, especially from an XD perspective, you see, and the amount of smaller, and when I say smaller, these are still companies that are taking on, multi-million-dollar projects, but, they're not owned by Disney or Universal or Meow Wolf or the Children's Museum or anything like that. They are their own private entities. And a lot of them are created by people who that is their story. They basically felt confined and constrained by where they were working. They didn't feel like they were being allowed to express themselves creatively. They didn't think that their company was had the best interest of the client in mind or their employees in mind. And so they took their skills and created their own organization that does similar things to like what an Imagineer would do or what an exhibit designer would do or something like that. That said, you're always caught in the endless cycle, right? Because you always kind of, the old, I'm a big Batman fan. The old mantra of, you either die a hero or you live to see yourself become a villain, right? That is what you see. And so you have all these companies. Meow Wolf's starting to experience it right now. They were this hip, new, independent company that was, going to revolutionize the experience design industry 10 years ago. Now there are people pushing back against their encroachment into territory. The hotel, the immersive experiential hotel that they're trying to build in Phoenix right now, is getting slammed by the local art community because they basically said it's a corporate art experience that is going to draw people away from independent artists. And so what used to be, this really cool, hip, kind of edgy place is now starting to become the villain and, become this corporate conglomerate in the vein of Disney or Universal or one of the bigger entertainment industries. And so it's a never ending cycle. And then of course, I'm sure people will eventually break off from Meow Wolf and then create their own companies and then wash, rinse, repeat. They will grow big, they will become the bad guy, and then people will break away to start a new, smaller, independent company. And so I think that's just the cycle of business, in my opinion. So I think, with film studios, with XD companies, with theme parks, with maybe not necessarily museums since they're nonprofits, but event companies, right? It's this never-ending cycle of, die a hero or live to see yourself become a villain, right?
With experience design, in some cases, really taking sort of a good budgetary chunk, or at least a foundation,
right.
How does that sort of process find itself? Let's say somebody says like, all right, that's it. I'm leaving company X. I'm starting, I want to open my own experience design place. This is sort of a startup for myself, but maybe it's not as small as, let's say, like a local breakout room. I was like an Imagineer or something, and I want to do my own thing. How does that sort of transition of budget and resources happen? Is that maybe primarily through connections?
Yeah, so it's who you know and what skills you have. Right. So I know myself personally, if I wanted to go create my own experience design business, I do not necessarily have like the construction and engineering skills. Right. So if I wanted to do that, I would either need to pull in one of my engineering friends or one of my art and design friends or acquaintances and say, hey, you want to start this venture with me? Or I would have to stick to what I necessarily know, which is more of the storytelling, world building, experiential analysis sort of stuff. And I guess teaching as well. But I would have to stick with what I know, or I would have to bring in more people who had those skills to kind of complement what I didn't have. And I think it's the same case if, an Imagineer wanted to go spin off their own business, right? Maybe they're going to be technically competent in 5 different areas. Okay, then they either have to decide their company is going to specifically only do those 5 certain areas, or they would have to bring in more people. And of course, they have connections all over the place, right? If you're an Imagineer or you're a head designer at some big XD company, a lot of people. The College of Extraordinary Experiences, I think we've talked about before. That is like the best place for an experience designer to go and get connected with other people within the industry. And you even see that. You see people who both, went to the college in 2018 or 2019. You'll see, oh, look, they're, working on some sort of collaborative project together, right? So it really is all about your connections and your own personal skills. That's going to decide what you do if you decide to go the independent way.
Gotcha. If you could design, this one's just kind of a fun question, really. This is a party popper. If you could design, well, maybe it'll be tough, actually. I don't know how I could even answer this on any topic, but if you could design a experience using any IP, intellectual property, then what would it be? And maybe you have an idea of how it would flow, what it would be.
So, me being the diehard Star Wars fan, I would probably go with Star Wars. However, there are so many Star Wars experiences right now. I'm gonna go a different direction with this. And I actually did this as one of my projects for one of my XD classes as an undergraduate. I would do a Wizarding World of Harry Potter sort of thing with Lord of the Rings, right? I would, because that's the thing. Like, there are no Lord of the Rings theme parks out there, or at least there are no big ones. But it's ripe for the sort of treatment that like Galaxy's Edge has, or like Wizarding World of Harry Potter has. Like, think of how cool that would be. You could go to the Shire and interact with the hobbits. You could go into the buildings. You could go to, Mount Doom, and they could do all sorts of like Halloween experiences there. And, that could be like the adult section. Again, I always kind of pictured a basically a tower drop ride on the Eye of Sauron, just because that would be that feels like that matches perfectly, right? But no, yeah, I just don't understand why one doesn't exist yet. And yeah, I would totally be down to try to design one of those, because I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I know my wife is even more of a Lord of the Rings fan than I am. And it bugs us that Harry Potter and Star Wars get that treatment, but something that's been around since, the 40s and arguably had more of a cultural impact than either of those other two has nothing,
Yeah. I think about that, but honestly now it kind of makes perfect sense. It's weird they wouldn't, especially with the amount of, I guess, practical elements that are in those movies, to incorporate that into a physical space would be, that makes perfect sense to me. And then
and we could even, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you're good. My bad.
No, and you could even incorporate, again, some of the, I know there are still props that are around from those films, and maybe actually I may be answering my own question here. If you make a Tolkien themed park, you have to make that distinction. Okay, do you want to do the movies or the books? And there is a difference. There are people out there that are hardcore, like, oh, I hate the Peter Jackson movies because they don't capture the kind of whimsical tone of the original story, right? And then there are people on the flip side who are like, oh God, the books are so boring, I would much rather watch the movies. And then there's the fact that if you did the movie Lord of the Rings, you would probably have to do the movie Hobbit as well, which 2 out of 3 of those were god awful. So,
maybe you didn't have to. Maybe you didn't have to.
maybe you just completely wash over those, and it's just the 3 Lord of the Rings books, and that is all. But no, I'm just very surprised that. And also, there's the whole thing with Tolkien's estate. The fact that a movie even got made in the first place is a miracle, just because they were against that whole concept for so long. So maybe that's what's holding the theme park up. I don't know.
And you may have answered this just now, to be honest, but in the description, right, it did talk about your fascination with film and TV and everything. What were some of your favorite movies and TV shows growing up? And has their influence in any way creeped their way into any experiences you've designed or any stories you've written?
Oh my gosh, yes. So my favorite movie of all time is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right, that is, I am a huge Indiana Jones fan. That's another one. Yeah, that's another one that I want to see more theme parks with Indiana Jones stuff. Come on, Disney, get on that. But no, so like Indiana Jones, those 4 movies, soon to be 5, which is insane to think about. Those had a huge influence on my writing style. I try to keep things more kind of lighthearted and whimsical with elements of, seriousness thrown in, right? That's a comment I get from my boss on any of the books I write, is that apparently I'm really good at doing action comedy, which Okay, of course I am, because that's kind of, Indiana Jones in a nutshell, right? It's the whimsical, fun adventure. Star Wars is a big one, obviously. Basically anything Spielberg. I'm a huge Spielberg fan, so any of his modern stuff has been disappointing me lately, but kind of pre-2000 Spielberg had a big influence on me personally. I am a huge fan, obviously, like I said, of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, the superhero genre, right? So, again, this is going to make me sound like a film bro, but, I will watch anything Christopher Nolan makes, right? I do not think even his worst movie is still better than, so many other movies out there. So yeah, sort of the action adventure genre obviously is kind of my go-to. I really kind of have a soft spot for 80s horror as well, just because it is so dumb and so over the top, but it's just so much fun, right? That's my big thing. It's like, I will watch an Oscar winning historical drama and enjoy it. I'll watch The Revenant, I'll watch Lincoln, I'll watch, Chariots of Fire, whatever, and I can appreciate those and I like them. But yeah, I like kind of the fun, corny, not taking itself too seriously sort of genre stuff.
So you've definitely seen.
Sorry, you cut out there.
Oh, so you've definitely seen Jason X, right?
Oh, of course I've seen Jason X. Yes.
That's one of my.
It's awful. It's awful, but I love it. I was gonna say yes. Shoving somebody's face into nitro, or not nitro. The word's escaping.
Liquid nitrogen.
Yes, liquid nitrogen. Yeah, and then smashing them against the counter. Yeah, it's just like it's so dumb, but I love it.
So, tell me about. I gotta know about the study of medieval food. How did that go? So I'll go ahead and let you answer that.
Oh no! I just thought it was funny that you bring that up. So with that, like so many things in my life, it just kind of happened, and I've just kind of run with it. So back when I was a undergraduate, one of my professors was doing a presentation at the International Congress of Medieval Studies, held in Kalamazoo, Michigan every year. And it's this big conference where basically people from all around the world get together to talk about the Middle Ages, right? And so and there's all sorts of subtopics, right? You've got religion people, you've got mythology people, you've got people talking about, gender studies, and there's even a cryptozoology group that talks about Middle Ages stuff. Yeah, they're really interesting to listen to. But one of those subgroups is the Mens at Mensa Society for the Study of Medieval Food, who obviously, as the name suggests, are all about how food was made, how it was processed, how it was presented. And so, I helped do some experiential demonstration with one of my professors one year. And then eventually, when after I had graduated, I started presenting there myself. Right. And so the first paper that I did was a more standard paper that was about how basically the medieval dining hall, when you did a feast, when a lord held a big dinner or something, basically was an XD space that was basically used to reaffirm the power structures of the time. Right. Because if you actually, I don't know how much you know about, the medieval dining hall, but it was intentionally set up, as many things were in the Middle Ages, to kind of be humble, not really humble brags, actually, to brag about your piety and your status in society. Like the king and the queen, sat at the head table, then you had your nobles next to them, and then you had, your lords. And then, of course, the further you got away from the king and the queen's position, the worse you were. And that was even incorporated in the food you ate. So the king and the queen would get white bread or something like that. Maybe not necessarily white bread, but they would get the better stuff. And then the people down at the corners got rye bread because they were lesser citizens, right? And so the way it was set up, it kind of reaffirmed the power structures of the time, and it almost was a designed experience. And so, yeah, I presented a paper on that. I did one about I did an experiential demonstration on how to make a Viking skier, which is like this cheese yogurt kind of hybrid. It's real good. It's basically like it's like a soft spreadable cheese that the Vikings would have made, right? And so I haven't done a presentation or a paper for them in a couple of years now, mainly due to COVID, obviously. But I'm still an active member. I pay my dues. I am part of the society. Yeah, again, it's just kind of something that I never would have expected to have done before, but I just kind of took it and ran with it.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting, especially from that historical perspective, in a way.
Yeah.
It sounds like a modern office meeting. Just a lot of posturing. You got like the assistants right here, and then everybody else just listen up. I got a PowerPoint right here.
Well, I mean, where do you think it came from? I mean, no, I mean, I would argue that, you could directly trace the way we set up, the modern hierarchical bureaucratic structures within a professional setting to, medieval England and medieval Germany and stuff like that. Because, yeah, it's the same thing. You're right. It is 100% the same thing. There was the story that came out, what was it? Back when Trump was still president, when, how he got like 3 scoops of ice cream and everyone else got 2. Right? Even simple stuff like that. You can trace that back to that reaffirming of the power structure that I would argue was created in that medieval dining hall. So yeah, it's just fascinating stuff.
With learning about history and along those lines as well, what are, I feel like this is especially going to sting on the medieval topic. What are some disappointing things that you found out about reality that didn't line up with some public perceptions of different time periods?
Ooh, that is a tough one. One that, well, I don't necessarily know if this is disappointing, but one that just really surprised me was the fact that, people actually lived a long time in the past. Right. There's this common misbelief that, everyone died at 30 or 40 and, nobody lived that long. That wasn't true. Right. So the infant mortality rate was so high that on average, people technically on average only lived to be, the average age of a medieval citizen was like their 30s or 40s. But there was a statistic that I read one time that like, what was it? If you made it to the age of like 20, you basically had a really good chance to living into your 60s or 70s, right? Which is no different than it is today, really. So that was one thing, not necessarily disappointing, but very interesting to learn about. Another one, forks. Forks were not a thing in medieval times. You ate with your knife, right? Which is kind of interesting to think about. You'd skewer things with, and it was the same knife you would use for hunting or for stabbing somebody if you were in a battle, right? You just kind of skewered your piece of meat and stuffed it in your mouth and you were all good, No
wonder disease was such a problem.
Yeah. Well, then, of course, then you get into humoral theory, which is fascinating in and of itself, just because some of the stuff that they did, it's fascinating because, like, it worked, but it didn't work for the reasons that they claimed it worked. Like with modern medicine, we can look back and say, okay, well, they were really doing this, but their whole thought process, their way of viewing things was completely different. And that has been, kind of back to your original question, one of the things, as, somebody who studied history as an undergrad, I don't do as much historical stuff as I used to. But as someone who studied history and, is passionate about experience design and has, dabbled in, living history and historical demonstrations and stuff like that, the most striking thing to me has been the fact that you really do have to put yourself in other people's shoes. And you have to understand that even if by our modern standards, the way they thought or the opinions they held were horrific, there were reasons they held them, right? Nobody is the villain in their own story, right? And so to kind of put yourself into their shoes and have that sort of empathy to understand that, okay, I completely disagree with their sensibilities and their opinions and their thought processes and the way they do things, right? So back to the humoral theory. We look at that today and we say, okay, well, they were all full of crap. They had no idea what they're doing. They were all stupid. That's not necessarily true. It's just they had a very different system of doing science than we do now. And again, some of the stuff worked, and it worked for reasons that we now understand with modern science, but they were on to something in some cases. And that has been kind of the big struggle. That is the big struggle I think we have just in society in general, is that kind of lack of empathy, understanding for viewpoints that aren't necessarily our own. And if you are doing experience design, especially in a historical setting, you got to have that, or else it just doesn't work. One thing that will never, ever, ever work in a historical XD setting is when you inject your own personal opinions into it, right? That just does not work. It ruins the immersion. It ruins the experience, makes it inauthentic. And so that has been the big thing that, again, not necessarily disappointing, but just something that has really hit me hard and kind of has been, it was a struggle when I started out, and it's something that I really, kind of truly feel everyone should understand at this point in time.
Absolutely. And I feel like that also kind of ties back again earlier, way back, to keeping in mind this sort of technocratic positive attitude that we have right now,
Right.
that we think we're so smart, we think we're so advanced. Obviously, it doesn't take that much thought to do the thought experiment. What if we're a brain in a vat? Or we're so small on a speck of dust. Okay, what does that achieve? But to look back and see something as simple as a tribal time, let's say, that's the very unsophisticated way of saying it. But when human beings figured out something as simple as, if I do something now, well, then later in the future, that is actually investment. We work all the time, everything we do, as an investment for the future. That's a very, very, very complicated idea that we take for granted every day. But if we look back now, we go, oh, people were just doing whatever they saw in front of them, hunting or eating or whatever, and just chasing different symbols, let's say. Well, they were so dumb. Why did they do that? Well, that's a very, very complex thing that we take for granted now. And that kind of ties into the other set of things that I don't remember what question it ties into. Oh, yes. Things that we will look back on later. In the same way that we look back on with those old, outdated cartoons with all those stigmatic symbology. I think today, my theory is that in 100 years, if that, we'll look back and we'll go, oh my God, all the people back in the 21st century had all of their clothes made by people and basically slaves in sweatshops and by children, and they were totally okay with it. And as long as they got their technology, and they got their iPhone, it was fine that people halfway across the world were in factories with suicide nets because, they were just working nonstop. Once we have the technology to automate all those things robotically with AI learning. And like you said, just to kind of concrete what you said, I think it's very important that we keep that perspective in mind to be able to zoom out and say, okay, where are we headed and what does this look like now and how did it look like then? What is that full trajectory? It's not what do we have now and how can we make it go? It's where is it going and how has it trended?
Yeah, and the big thing to remember, just again, in general, you and I, we are no different than our ancestors, back in the prehistoric times, right? We are the same human beings with I guess there was an evolution of our brain at some point, but the modern human, the modern Homo sapien, we are basically no different than they are. The only difference is we have better technology, we have a more advanced system of social organization, we have a more advanced language, but at our core, we're the same people, right? We are the same as we have always been. And so that's important to keep in mind that, 100 years from now, they're just going to be people just like us, just like 100 years previously. Those were just people like us. They wanted to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? They wanted self-actualization. They wanted a roof over their heads. They wanted to be loved and accepted, right? The human nature, the human experience has been consistent throughout time. We just have this problem of we view them differently. I think this got brought up in class one time. This whole concept of the past being a foreign country, right? Someone who lived 100 years ago may as well be, somebody who lives halfway across the globe because their culture was so different, their way of speaking was so different, their values were so different. But at the end of the day, they were just humans like we are, Again, tangent, but
no, the tangents are all good. Believe me, I do the same thing. So I have to put the brakes on a little bit to let them.
It's like, okay, all right, bring it back in
now. So I know along those lines again. I know we touched on that from sort of a technological perspective, from an experience design perspective earlier, where we're talking about augmented reality. Where could that possibly lead to sort of how we distribute our entertainment and experiences and what constitutes what those are and sort of the choice involved in that. From a historical perspective, with the rate in which technology is advancing, faster than it ever has in history, and the amount of time it takes human beings' social structure to catch up with technology, what do you believe, based on maybe past examples or the trend, some positive and negative outcomes as to how this increase, and just to try and narrow it down so I don't throw the whole world to try and explain, maybe in terms of something as simple as just the transistors increasing on the size of, 2 DNA strands. If we have supercomputers that can do stuff super fast, maybe what is a historical consequence of that based on how that's gone, let's say, message transportation and communication efficiency in the past?
Well, and that's a fascinating topic because, again, I think everybody has their own opinion on that, and frankly, we don't know. Personally, what I see, I'm kind of on the fence about two different directions. One is my optimistic side, one is my pessimistic side, right? So my optimistic side would say that, okay, we've got this new technology that will help us, help us be more efficient. It will help us communicate better. It will help us, again, if you could send a message instantaneously without even, just with the neurons in your brain, right? Not even needing to text it or have good service or whatever, right? If we ever get to that point where we all got microchips in our head and we can send messages to each other instantly, again, that really helps. That helps with communication. That helps with the processes of efficiency in our society, which could lead to what I think, what a lot of authors I've read argues would lead to more free time, more leisure time, more time to kind of think about more philosophical topics or more ethical topics and trying to make the world kind of a better place, right? That is the optimistic side. My pessimistic side basically says, if you have more free time, there's going to be more free time to be exploited, right? Especially here in the US, it's like, we have less vacation days than just about every other developed country in the world. We have this kind of hustle culture, particularly with my generation and your generation, of, every single second that you have to spare needs to be filled by doing something productive, right? Whether that is doing something that'll make you money or studying to increase your skills or whatever, right? That is kind of where my pessimistic side is going. It's like, okay, so you have this microchip in your brain that can have instant communications. Well, guess what? Well, advertisers can also communicate with you instantly, right? You could be sleeping and get an ad for NyQuil or something, right? Oh yeah, we noticed that your brain patterns, you're not going into REM. So here, try these new melatonin gummies that we have, right? So I could see that because with not to rag on capitalism or anything, but in a capitalistic society, it's like anything that can be used to produce more monetary value will be. And so I think, like I said, it could go one of two ways, right? It could be, we could go utopian or dystopian, right? It could go either way, or probably the more accurate answer is, what has actually happened. It'll be somewhere in the middle, right? Maybe we'll have, more leisure time, but also we'll have the ads, that are instantaneously sent to us. We will have these optional XR living experiences that we can take home with us or take across multiple venues. But at the same time, maybe there's some manipulative, some subtle manipulation in there that's trying to get us to buy more, right? So that's probably, if I'm being a realist here, it's probably somewhere in the middle, right? That's kind of a non-answer. It's like, yeah, the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the realistic scenario.
No, I think that is probably the most accurate, the manner in which those two converge. I think it's very interesting to think that, especially with trends now, that perhaps when the two converge, it could further expedite the difference in equality of opportunity. So this almost gets like cyberpunk at that point, where if you have the technology, you have so much more time and opportunity versus the people that don't. And you can either invest that however you want, or if everybody gets it, perhaps equality of opportunity is even more even now because it's affordable to the Western society as a whole. But if you're the person that decides to spend their leisure time now not working on the next opportunity, then you fall even further from those further opportunities that you would have been granted before. So, yeah, very interesting stuff. I think that's honestly a great stopping point talking about opportunity. It's a little optimistic. Thank you seriously so much for taking the time to come do this.
I'm glad you had me. This has been a really fun conversation.
Absolutely. Especially with the quarantine and everything. I'm just gnawing. I'm begging for conversations like this all the time. And I finally get it. And my brain's a little tweaked. I'm kind of trying to figure out how to talk to people again. But hopefully through all the ums and along those lines that I realized I was saying about 4 to 5 times a response towards the end, we achieved something good, which I think we did, because that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that.
That was really fun.